You know that little voice in your head that screams, "Bad idea"? Well, the 10 people in this video didn't just ignore that voice, they strangled it. We are looking at 10 legends of bad judgment who turned simple tasks into fatal disasters. From DIY dentistry to fighting gravity with umbrellas, here is exactly how not to live your life. Let's get into it. 1. Since the dawn of time, humanity has looked at the birds and thought, "Hey, I bet I could do that if I just had enough fabric and zero self-preservation instincts." But while the Wright brothers spent years studying lift and drag, our first honoree, a Texan visionary named Wayne, decided that aeronautical engineering was just a conspiracy created by big science to sell expensive tickets. Wayne was the kind of guy who fixed his car engine with duct tape and believed that warning labels were just legal suggestions for cowards. His logic was breathtakingly simple. Parachutes are basically just big umbrellas, right? They both have fabric, they both catch air, and they both open up. So why pay thousands of dollars for a professionally packed rig when you can just raid the clearance aisle at the local patio depot? It was a thought process that bypassed the frontal lobe entirely and went straight to the part of the brain responsible for holding beer. Wayne spent a week in his garage, which looked less like a workshop and more like a crime scene for common sense, constructing his masterpiece. He took 4 massive, heavy canvas garden umbrellas, the kind designed to protect potato salad from the sun, not a human body from the earth, and lashed them together with a chaotic web of bungee cords and electrical tape. He didn't bother calculating drag coefficients or structural integrity because math is for people who don't have gut instincts. Now, for the physics lesson that Wayne skipped. A parachute is designed with vents to stabilize air and lines that reinforce the canopy. An umbrella is designed to turn inside out the moment a stiff breeze hits it. Ignorant of this critical difference, Wayne hauled his contraption to the roof of a 3-story commercial building. Why 3 stories? Because it was high enough to prove his point, but low enough that he didn't need an airplane. It was the Goldilocks zone of fatality. Standing on the ledge, strapped into a harness that looked like it was made from recycled seatbelts, Wayne looked like a budget Mary Poppins about to drop the hottest mixtape of 2024. He didn't hesitate. He didn't look down. He launched himself into the void with the confidence of a Greek god. And for precisely 0.4 seconds, he looked majestic. Then physics filed a restraining order. The moment his body weight hit the harness, the air pressure didn't gently slow him down. It violently assaulted the umbrellas. With a sound like a gunshot, all 4 canopies instantly inverted, snapping their cheap aluminum spines and transforming from drag devices into aerodynamic darts. Instead of floating, Wayne plummeted with increased velocity, a lawn furniture meteorite hurtling toward the pavement. The impact was audible 3 blocks away. He didn't bounce, he didn't roll, and he certainly didn't fly. Wayne proved conclusively that while you can save money on almost anything, gravity charges full price. He was pronounced dead at the scene, surrounded by the twisted wreckage of his patio set, leaving behind a legacy that serves as a grim warning to DIY enthusiasts everywhere. If your invention can be defeated by a gust of wind, maybe don't trust it with your life. 2. We move from the high skies to the deep earth, where the quest for knowledge often collides violently with the laws of geology. Meet Silas, a self-proclaimed paranormal investigator whose enthusiasm for the afterlife was only matched by his complete misunderstanding of how the current life works. Silas wasn't your average ghost hunter who just runs around a dusty attic screaming, "Did you hear that?" at a creaky floorboard. No, Silas was an innovator. He believed that the spirit world operated on a very specific audio frequency that was being muffled by the density of the earth. His theory, which he likely concocted at 3 a.m. after a marathon of spooky YouTube videos, was that to get a crystal-clear electronic voice phenomenon, EVP, you had to get the microphone closer to the source. And since the source was 6 feet under, that's where Silas needed to be. He scouted a local cemetery that was famous for 2 things: being haunted and being filled with incredibly heavy, unstable Victorian-era monuments. He zeroed in on the grave of a 19th-century industrialist, marked by a massive solid granite obelisk weighing roughly 2 tons. To a rational person, this is a heavy rock. To Silas, it was a sound booth. Under the cover of a moonless night, Armed with a spade and a high-gain shotgun microphone, he began his excavation. His plan was to dig a listening tunnel at a 45-degree angle directly underneath the heavy stone foundation, creating a cavity where he could insert his equipment and record the whispers of the damned. Now, let's pause for a quick lesson in civil engineering. Foundations work because the dirt underneath them stays there. When you remove that dirt, you are essentially pulling the chair out from under a granite giant. Silas, however, was too busy adjusting his gain levels to worry about load-bearing soil mechanics. He dug with the fervor of a man possessed, hollowing out a space right beneath the massive plinth. Satisfied with his work, he did the unthinkable. He crawled halfway into the hole, head first, to position the mic. He was literally belly-crawling into a trap he had set for himself. As he reached into the darkness, perhaps he heard a groan. He probably thought it was a ghost. It wasn't. It was the sound of 2 tons of granite surrendering to gravity. The destabilized monument tipped forward, pivoting perfectly on the edge of the hole. It didn't fall fast. It fell with the slow, crushing inevitability of a glacier. The slab slammed down, collapsing the tunnel and pinning Silas instantly. The irony is almost too perfect to write. In his desperate attempt to communicate with the dead, he successfully joined their ranks in record time. He had quite literally dug his own grave, lowered himself into it, and pulled the tombstone shut like a door. When the groundskeeper found him the next morning, the only thing recorded on his expensive microphone was the sound of a very heavy mistake. 3. The holiday season is a magical time of year, characterized by peace, joy, and the silent, seething hatred between suburban neighbors over who has the better light display. This brings us to Gary, a man who treated Christmas decoration not as a festive tradition, but as a tactical military operation. Gary lived in a nice neighborhood in Indiana, but his soul was tormented by the man across the street, whose LED reindeer display was brighter, synchronized to music, and generally superior in every way. Gary decided that this was the year he would go nuclear. His weapon of choice? An 80-foot towering pine tree in his front yard that he planned to wrap in so many lights it would be visible from the International Space Station. But there was a logistical hurdle. Gary didn't own a ladder tall enough to reach the summit of his ambition. Most people would hire a professional. Gary, however, hired a cherry picker, an industrial boom lift designed for construction sites, not for a dad in pajama pants who thinks safety harness is a term for people with no sense of adventure. He rented the beastly machine, towed it home, and drove it right onto his front lawn. Now, here is where the tragedy begins. The rental manual, which Gary immediately threw in the trash, had a very specific warning in bold red letters: do not operate on inclines. Gary's front lawn was not flat. It was a picturesque rolling slope, perfect for sledding but absolutely homicidal for high center of gravity machinery. Furthermore, the machine had outriggers, extendable metal legs designed to stabilize it. Gary looked at them, decided they would take too long to deploy, and ignored them. He hopped into the bucket, a captain steering his ship into an iceberg, and began the ascent. As the hydraulic arm extended, pushing him 40, 50, then 60 feet into the air, the physics of leverage began to turn against him. The higher he went, the more top-heavy the entire rig became. The tires on the uphill side began to lift ever so slightly off the soft winter grass. Gary, focused entirely on untangling a knot of twinkle-white bulbs, didn't feel the shift until it was too late. As he reached out to place the star at the very top, the center of gravity crossed the point of no return. The machine didn't just tip, it lurched. With a sickening metallic groan, the entire lift pivoted on the slope. Gary rode the bucket down in a terrifying, screaming arc, creating a parabolic curve of regret that ended abruptly on his paved driveway. The impact was catastrophic, a tangled mess of steel, glass, and crushed ambition. The cherry picker lay on its side like a dead mechanical dinosaur, and Gary was gone, a victim of the classic blunder, fighting a war against gravity with a weapon you don't know how to use. In the end, he did get the most flashing lights on the block that night, but they were all on top of the police cruisers and ambulances that came to clean up the mess. 4. The modern office is usually a place of crushing boredom, stale coffee, and passive-aggressive emails, but occasionally, it becomes a theater of war for the office prankster. Enter Kevin, a man whose job title was accountant, but whose self-perceived calling was the king of comedy. Kevin didn't just want to put a stapler in Jell-O, he wanted to create art. For his colleague's birthday, he conceived a masterstroke. He would turn the man's entire cubicle into a giant transparent aquarium of balloons. His medium of choice? Industrial-grade shrink wrap. Kevin spent hours stealing rolls from the warehouse, meticulously wrapping the cubicle walls, the entrance, and even the ceiling, creating a perfectly airtight, hermetically sealed plastic bubble. It was a feat of engineering that NASA would have admired, had it not been designed for something so incredibly stupid. Once the seal was complete, Kevin faced a logistical hurdle. He needed to fill this plastic tomb with hundreds of balloons, and he needed to do it fast before the boss arrived. A rational human being might have used an electric air pump or, heaven forbid, his own lungs. But Kevin was a man of efficiency. He went out to his truck and retrieved his gas-powered leaf blower. Now, for those of you who skipped chemistry class to smoke behind the gym, let's review. Gas engines work by burning fuel and spitting out exhaust. A major component of that exhaust is carbon monoxide, a gas that is odorless, colorless, and famously incompatible with human life. Kevin, oblivious to the fact that he was holding a portable asphyxiation machine, sliced a small slit in the plastic, climbed inside the sealed cubicle, and taped the slit shut behind him to ensure maximum balloon containment. He fired up the two-stroke engine. The roar was deafening, the balloons were swirling like a colorful tornado, and Kevin was having the time of his life. He was literally standing inside a plastic bag, running a combustion engine, laughing at his own genius. Within minutes, the small, airtight space was flooded with exhaust fumes. The oxygen levels plummeted faster than his credit score. Kevin started to feel lightheaded, a sensation he likely attributed to the sheer hilarity of the prank or perhaps the party vibe. He didn't gasp or choke. He simply got very tired, very quickly. He sat down in the swirling sea of latex, the leaf blower still chugging away in his lap, pumping lethal gas into the colorful void. He passed out with a smile on his face, effectively throwing himself a surprise going-away party. When his colleague arrived the next morning, he didn't find a funny prank. He found a grim, plastic-wrapped diorama of stupidity. Kevin had managed to construct a DIY gas chamber in the middle of an accounting firm, proving that while laughter is the best medicine, carbon monoxide is a terrible substitute for oxygen. He died as he lived, full of hot air and trapped in a bubble of his own making. 5. In the rugged land of Australia, competitive eating is less of a hobby and more of a gladiator sport, where the lions are replaced by saturated fats and the combatants are men who consider indigestion a sign of weakness. Meet Bruce, a local legend in his own mind, who had his eyes set on the town's prestigious meat pie eating record. The record stood at an impressive 35 pies in 1 hour, a number that would make a normal pancreas resign in protest. But Bruce wasn't normal. He was innovative. He identified the one thing standing between him and glory: the human body's pesky survival instincts. You see, the stomach has stretch receptors, nerves that scream, "Stop eating, you idiot," when you're about to explode. Bruce decided these nerves were just haters trying to hold him back. In a stroke of medically ill-advised genius, he acquired a supply of local anesthetic and heavy-duty painkillers, the kind usually reserved for horses or people recovering from shark attacks. Before the big attempt, Bruce injected his abdominal wall and swallowed a cocktail of pills, effectively severing the communication line between his stomach and his brain. He had hacked the system. He sat down at the table, a pile of steaming meat pies before him, feeling absolutely nothing. The timer started, and Bruce went to work. He ate like a wood chipper, 10 pies, 20 pies, 30 pies. The spectators cheered, amazed at his poker face. He didn't sweat, he didn't grimace, he didn't slow down. He broke the record at 36 pies and just kept going, fueled by adrenaline and a complete lack of sensation. He hit 40, then 41. At pie number 42, the laws of physics intervened. The human stomach is a muscular bag, not a TARDIS. It has a finite volume. Without the pain signals to trigger the vomit reflex or force him to stop, Bruce simply filled the bag until the structural integrity failed. With a wet, muffled pop that he didn't even feel, his stomach wall ruptured. Massive amounts of semi-digested pastry and meat flooded his abdominal cavity. To the crowd, he looked like a champion who had just finished his victory lap. He stood up, raised his arms in triumph, and then immediately collapsed like a marionette with cut strings. The internal catastrophe was instant and fatal. By the time he hit the floor, septic shock was already sending him to the great buffet in the sky. Bruce had achieved his goal. He died the undisputed champion, a man who literally ate himself to death because he was too stubborn to listen to his own gut. 6. Modern industrial machinery is a marvel of efficiency, designed to perform repetitive tasks with brutal speed and zero empathy. The commercial chicken defeathering machine is a prime example, a terrifying tunnel of spinning rubber fingers that can pluck a bird clean in seconds. It is a machine that demands respect, distance, and a basic understanding of keep your hands out of the spinny bit. Enter Carl, a processing plant worker who viewed safety protocols as optional obstacles to his day. Carl was the kind of guy who was always in a rush, always cutting corners, and apparently valued his personal property more than his limbs. On a Tuesday that started like any other, disaster struck in the form of a fumble. As Carl leaned over the conveyor belt to adjust a nozzle, his car keys slipped out of his breast pocket. He watched in slow motion as they landed on the metal belt, jingling merrily as they moved toward the gaping maw of the defeathering machine. Now, every machine in the plant has a big red emergency stop button. It's there for exactly this kind of situation. But Carl did the mental math. If he hit the button, the line would stop, the supervisor would come over, he'd have to explain his clumsiness, and the reboot cycle would take 10 minutes. That sounded like a lot of paperwork. Carl decided on Plan B, the snatch and grab. He figured he had the reflexes of a ninja. He was wrong. As the keys moved past the safety guard, Carl lunged. He bypassed the safety barrier, reaching his arm deep into the danger zone. He actually managed to touch the keys, but he forgot that the machine wasn't just a belt. It was a whirlwind of friction. One of the spinning rubber fingers moving at hundreds of revolutions per minute didn't grab the chicken. It grabbed the loose cuff of Carl's uniform. In the blink of an eye, the physics of torque took over. The machine didn't care that Carl was a human and not a rooster. It just knew it had something to pull. He was yanked off his feet with the force of a freight train. There was no time to scream, no time to regret the decision, and certainly no time to reach the e-stop button he had so arrogantly ignored. The machine pulled him in, and let's just say it was designed to strip things down to the bone, and it was very, very good at its job. The car keys were later recovered from the reject bin, completely unharmed. Carl, however, was not. He had traded his life for a 2010 Honda Civic key fob, proving that in the battle between human impatience and industrial torque, the machine always wins. It was a plucking tragedy that could have been avoided by pushing a button, but Carl just had to do it the hard way. 7. The pursuit of physical perfection is a tale as old as time, usually involving uncomfortable corsets, questionable diet teas, or spending hours in a gym lifting heavy things for no reason. But in the modern age, the quest for beauty has migrated to the lawless wasteland of the internet, where dangerous shortcuts are packaged as life hacks. Meet Sakura, a young woman in Japan whose obsession with achieving the perfect smile led her down a rabbit hole of aesthetic delusion and catastrophic decision-making. Sakura wasn't satisfied with the teeth nature gave her. She wanted the glowing, blindingly white perfection she saw on heavily filtered Instagram feeds. However, actual dentistry is expensive, regulated, and involves boring things like medical degrees, sterile environments, and years of training. Sakura, seeking a bargain, found a workaround on a shady, unmoderated online forum, a revolutionary cosmetic procedure offered by a practitioner whose credentials were essentially, "Trust me, I own a Dremel tool." The procedure was radical, experimental, and sounded like something from a medieval torture manual. Filing the natural teeth down to jagged little shark points to fit custom, discount veneers. A rational person hears, "File my teeth into nubs in a basement apartment," and runs for the hills. Sakura, blinded by the promise of a Hollywood smile at a dollar store price, booked an appointment. The clinic was a dimly lit room that smelled of ozone, desperation, and bad choices. The practitioner, who likely learned his craft from watching YouTube tutorials on drywall repair, went to work. He ground her healthy enamel down past the dentin and straight to the pulp, bypassing the biological barriers that protect the brain from the bacteria-filled mouth. The pain was excruciating, a screaming, drilling agony. But Sakura told herself it was just beauty entering the body. When the caps were glued on with what was essentially industrial superglue, she looked in the mirror and saw perfection. Her body, however, saw a massive open wound being sealed shut, trapping bacteria against the exposed nerves. Within days, the pain returned, not as a dull ache, but as a blinding fire that radiated through her jaw. Her gums turned the color of an angry sunset. Instead of going to a real hospital, she took painkillers and assumed it was just the settling period, ignoring the fact that her face was slowly swelling like a balloon. It wasn't settling. It was a raging bacterial infection traveling along the exposed nerve highways directly into her skull. The bacteria, thrilled by the lack of resistance, set up shop in her cavernous sinus and eventually, her brain. She collapsed at home, her perfect smile masking a septic catastrophe occurring inches behind it. By the time paramedics arrived, the infection had caused massive swelling and irreversible damage. Sakura died not from a car crash or a fall, but because she tried to life hack biology, trading her life for a set of teeth that looked great in the casket. It is a tragic, terrifying reminder that when it comes to medical procedures, you get exactly what you pay for, and sometimes the price is your pulse. 8. In the humid, moss-draped heat of rural Louisiana, a silent war was brewing. On one side was Earl, a retiree who treated his pecan trees with the protective reverence usually reserved for royal heirs. On the other side were the squirrels, fuzzy, acrobatic thieves who viewed Earl's backyard as an all-you-can-eat buffet. Earl had tried everything to stop them: plastic owls that scared no one, grease that just made the squirrels shinier, pellet guns that he couldn't aim, and polite shouting. Nothing worked. The squirrels were relentless, mocking him with their twitchy tails and full cheeks, treating his property lines as mere suggestions. Pushed to the brink of sanity by the loss of his nuts, Earl decided to escalate the conflict from garden nuisance to capital punishment. He conceived a plan that was as effective as it was illegal and incredibly dangerous. He decided to turn his trees into electrified obelisks of death. Earl went to his shed and gathered rolls of heavy-gauge copper wire, stripping them down to the bare, conductive metal with the focus of a bomb disposal expert working in reverse. He wrapped the trunks of his beloved pecan trees in a lethal coil, creating a copper corset designed to fry anything that touched it. Then, displaying a shocking lack of respect for electrical code or common sense, he ran a heavy-duty cable from the trees directly to a 220-volt outlet in his garage, the kind used for clothes dryers and welding equipment. He bypassed the breaker box, essentially turning his backyard into an open-air electric chair. He flipped the switch. It worked. The first squirrel to attempt the climb was instantly vaporized in a puff of fur and ozone. Earl felt like a god. He had conquered nature with voltage. For weeks, his pecans were safe, and the squirrels learned to fear the humming trees. But familiarity breeds complacency, and complacency is the Grim Reaper's favorite accomplice. One sweltering Saturday, Earl was out mowing the lawn, pushing his old gas mower through the thick grass, sweat pouring down his face. Tired, overheated, and dehydrated, he stopped to catch his breath. Without thinking, his mind likely drifting to thoughts of iced tea or how many pecans he had saved, he leaned back against the sturdy trunk of his favorite pecan tree to rest. He had forgotten to unplug his invention. The moment his sweat-soaked shirt touched the copper wire, he completed the circuit. 220 volts of unbridled electricity surged through his body, locking his muscles instantly and stopping his heart before he could even realize his mistake. Earl had built the perfect trap, a fortress of solitude for his harvest, and then walked right into it himself. He died defending his pecans, killed by the very weapon he created to protect them. a tragic victim of the classic set it and forget it mentality applied to lethal voltage. 9. Brazil is known for its vibrant culture, football, and cachaça, a potent sugarcane spirit that, if distilled incorrectly, can power a rocket or blind a donkey. Meet Paulo, a man who loved cachaça so much he decided to cut out the middleman, the taxes, and the safety regulations by brewing his own in a shed behind his house. Distilling alcohol is a precise science involving chemistry, temperature control, and a healthy fear of explosions. Paulo had none of these things. He had a copper pot, some scavenged tubing, and a thirst that couldn't wait. His homemade still was a Frankenstein's monster of plumbing parts and optimism, held together by hope and ignorance. One afternoon, while in the middle of a massive production run, with the burner roaring and the mash boiling, Paulo noticed a critical problem. A fine mist of alcohol vapor was hissing out of a hairline crack in the copper delivery tube. Now, any high school chemistry student knows that alcohol vapor is highly flammable, explosively so. The correct procedure in this situation is to kill the heat source immediately, ventilate the room, evacuate, and wait for everything to cool down before even thinking about repairs. Paulo, however, operated on a schedule dictated by impatience and a fundamental misunderstanding of flashpoints. He looked at the leak, then looked at his handheld propane blowtorch, and thought, I can fix that on the fly. It was a decision roughly equivalent to trying to sew a parachute while falling out of a plane, or trying to dry a puddle of gasoline with a lighter. He fired up the torch, adjusting the blue flame to a precise needlepoint of intense heat. He leaned in, bringing the open flame inches away from the cloud of high-proof alcohol vapor spewing from the pipe to apply some solder. The physics of combustion took over instantly. The vapor cloud didn't just catch fire, it detonated. The air in the shed ignited with the force of a fuel air bomb. The copper pot, pressurized with boiling alcohol, ruptured in the blast, spraying boiling liquid and shrapnel across the room. The shed was leveled in a fraction of a second, transformed from a distillery into a smoking crater. Paulo didn't just learn a lesson about flashpoints and vapor pressure. He became a part of the lesson. The neighbors reported a sound like a thunderclap, followed by the smell of burnt sugar and regret. Paulo's attempt to save 5 minutes on a repair cost him roughly 40 years of life expectancy, proving that when you mix high-proof alcohol, a pressurized gas leak, and an open flame, the bartender always calls last call immediately. 10. We end our tour of tragedy in the dark, specifically during a neighborhood power outage that plunged a suburban home into ink-black obscurity. The homeowner, let's call him Dave, was a man who prided himself on his sensory intuition, which is a polite way of saying he trusted his nose more than his brain. As the house sat in darkness, the pilot light on his vintage gas stove flickered and died, cutting the flame but not the fuel flow. Slowly, silently, the kitchen began to fill with propane. Now, utility companies add a chemical called mercaptan to gas, which gives it that distinct, unmistakable, rotten egg smell, specifically so you know to run away and call for help. It is nature's way of screaming, "Explosion imminent," into your nostrils. Dave sat on his couch and sniffed. Ugh, he thought. Something smells terrible. Instead of identifying the scent as imminent death, Dave categorized it as minor domestic annoyance, perhaps assuming the trash needed to be taken out, or the dog had made a mistake. In a moment of supreme cognitive failure, he decided the solution wasn't to open a window or check the gas line, but to improve the ambiance. He fumbled around in the dark until he found his wife's prized vanilla bean explosion scented candle and a Bic lighter. Dave's plan was to mask the bad smell with a good smell, a tactic that works for dirty laundry or a gym bag, but is catastrophically ill-advised for combustible gas leaks. He stood in the middle of the kitchen, surrounded by an invisible combustible cloud of propane that was hovering right at the perfect explosive mixture ratio. He flicked the lighter. The spark was tiny, barely enough to see by, but it was more than enough for the gas. The reaction was instantaneous. The flame from the lighter didn't just light the candle, it lit the entire room. The accumulated gas ignited with a concussive force that blew the kitchen windows out into the street and rearranged the structural integrity of the house. Dave was launched backward, a victim of his own olfactory misunderstanding. He had tried to Febreze a bomb. The fire marshal's report later noted the tragic irony. The man who just wanted his house to smell like vanilla ended up making it look like a war zone. It serves as a blindingly bright reminder that when your house smells like rotten eggs, you don't need aromatherapy, you need evacuation. Dave's final act was to turn a gas leak into a combustion engine, with himself as the piston, exiting the gene pool in a blaze of vanilla-scented glory. Okay, look me in the eye and tell the truth. We've all survived something we definitely shouldn't have. I want to know your near miss. What is the absolute dumbest thing you did that almost put you on this list? Confess in the comments below. I'm reading everything. Hit like if you're glad you survived your teenage years, and subscribe for more.